microphone's bent, so the switch doesn't switch. It's really annoying. Ideal and Wada, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, ideal. Yeah.
Cool, man.
Yeah, I guess now it's basically now they have like the agency it was just like this year thing. And I'm like taking so you just step like so for KJ. So you step and describe
When you give everyone microphones, do you want to remind them
yeah, they're like
to hold
scratching.
Yeah,
it to the chin?
I'll give them the
We just scratch them.
Yeah.
It was pretty funny yesterday, though. All over the place.
Yeah, he's just like soft-spoken. And just like, come on, man.
Help us out a little bit.
series. Clarkson,
Where's Hadil?
as we all want and do.
Like,
My name is
where's
Joe
Hadil?
Cressy. I'm a downtown city councillor here in Toronto, and I also represent this area.
Oh, there she is.
And I'm here in
You
part
blend-
to introduce
Your purple and
today's
black
important
blended
topic
right into the
in
curtain
360
there,
of Home,
so-
but also to once again welcome you to our city. And in
Yanis,
welcoming you,
remember,
as we
Yanis,
talk
you
about
have to
home,
hold it like that.
let
I'll
me-
show you. Like
let
a
me tell you
good
about my
boy,
home
like that.
briefly.
Wave your other hand.
and we have a little
Wave
echo
one arm,
there
like
on
a
back
conductor.
channel. When you look at the city of Toronto, how many of you are from Toronto? Let me just get a show of hands.
Yeah,
And so about half the room. So our city, in many ways, is a spectacular home. Many people are feeling pretty good at the moment. The Economist magazine says that we're the most livable city, in the world. Not bad.
Yeah.
Wired magazine says that our city is the most intelligent city, one of the most intelligent homes in the world. Also not bad. KPMG says we're the most tax competitive city, the most tax competitive home in the world. I'm not sure I know what that means, but it's not bad. These are all good laurels for our home, for our city. But then there are other laurels for our home and our city that perhaps aren't as positive. That an organization here, the United Way, says that we're the most unequal city in all of Canada. That in our home, the gap between rich and poor is growing at a faster rate than any other city in Canada. The Children's Aid Society says that in our home, in our city, we have the most child poverty in all of Canada. And the waiting list in our home for people to find affordable homes is now at 191,000. And so on the basis of how well we treat and care for the people who live here, you might say that our home is experiencing some real difficulties. And so here we are at 6 Degrees, where we look to challenge each other and ourselves to understand what inclusion means. And what does home mean? Well, as we know all too well, home is more than bricks and mortars. A home is more than where you live. A home is how welcome you feel. A home is how included you are. And so, as I welcome you on behalf of the City of Toronto to our home, I would tell you that as a straight white kid from downtown Toronto who got elected, I feel pretty welcome here. But the sad reality is that this home is, well, it's a frightening place for many. And so I hope in today's discussion, we challenge ourselves to think about what home really means in the cities in we live, and frankly, the world, the scary world we sometimes operate in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming and taking part in this, Vala.
Thank you.
I know how much you have to travel. It's really a privilege for us
Thank
to have
you.
you.
Before we get underway, I wanted to let you know that there was a session yesterday morning called Coffee House. At that session, a number of groups, 9 groups altogether, discussed our 3 themes for this year. That is walls, bridges, and homes. And coming out of that discussion, came up with 9 calls to action. And those calls, are basically things that they think we should be doing next. So beyond the talking and the conversation, what can we do? Where do we go from here? What action do we take? So on these screens, you will see a website, www.sli.do/6degreesto. And on that site, there's a poll. So that poll lists all 9 calls to action. What we're hoping you can do, and you can do it now, is to go to the site and basically rank your top 3. So that if everyone does that, we can take a read of this room, and we can take a read of anyone else who sees our poll on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. And that way we'll have a better sense of where you think we should be going once we leave the room this afternoon. So again, we welcome you all to 6 Degrees. This is the beginning of day 2. After this session, we go to an exchange, we have lunch, and then we have our final exchange called What's Next? So we all get to talk about where do we go from here. Without further ado, I welcome you to 360 Homes.
Before we begin, I just want to make sure, because yesterday we had some trouble with these head mics, and I want to make sure that mine, I'm the only one wearing one, taking the risk of wearing one, that everyone can hear me. Okay? Great, I'm so glad. We've had the most wonderful first day, and I'm really happy that we're rolling. We're kind of greased on the road because I have the advantage of having people who've already been here and understand what the format is and how we're going to work. For about the first half hour, we will talk among ourselves. We've already been talking for an hour upstairs over our nice little breakfast, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. We have mics. You've been told that by Karen, and we want to have the full discussion with everybody. We have so much that's interesting going on. And so welcome to all of you. And I will introduce everybody briefly, and I want to get them all right. So I have it written down. Kiku Adato, she is a scholar in residence at Harvard University's Mahindra Humanities Center. Yanis Barakas, the Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist. You've seen his photos everywhere. You just didn't identify with the little tiny credit, but I always look at little tiny credits. And I've seen his before I ever met him last year in Doha. Sunny Bergman, who is from the Netherlands, and she's a documentary filmmaker and activist. Vada Kanfar, who is from Palestine, wherever that is, whatever it means. Co-founder of Common Action Forum and the former Director General of Al Jazeera, which made a great change for us in the media landscape. Al Jazeera generally, and then when it became Al Jazeera English, made a tremendous contribution, I think, to the way in which we were able to look at media and have media. And Nadil Ibrahim, who is the founding executive director of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation and co-chair of the Africa Center. We have had a wonderful chat already over our yogurt and buns upstairs, and we're in the middle of our conversation, really. So I'll just kick it off a little bit by saying that for me, home is a very interesting concept because I had it taken away from me, and I realize, and I echo Margaret Atwood's statement yesterday, that we are old. Margaret Atwood and I are at exactly the same age. We went to university together, and we remember the Second World War. I guess that's what it means to be old. And also the Korean War, and the 1948 war in the Middle East, and the assassination of Count Foka Bernadotte, and all those things we remember. We were children. And so basically, I think that we take a view of our country and our world which is a little bit more distanced. And I take a view of it which, as I grow older, I realize has had this most enormous effect on me, which is that of having been a refugee and having come to Canada as a refugee, having lost everything, having been completely displaced, and not knowing where you're going. This is one of the interesting things about being a refugee who gets transported somewhere, that you don't know what your destination may be. And that is where I identify totally with the people who are in those boats going somewhere, because they don't know where. They say, we want to go to Germany, we maybe would love to get to Britain, but they really don't know what the ultimate destination is. In a way, it's counterindicative to the European overriding myth, which is the Odyssey, which is Homer. Because at the end of the Trojan War, Odysseus, who has been the great hero and is the wily person, goes home in a very, very, very circuitous fashion. He has a home and he doesn't go to it. The Odyssean myth is that you have a goal, but you make your way towards it slowly. And when you get there, you recapture it totally. You say to your wife, what have you been doing while I've been away? You hang and kill all her maids because they might have witnessed what she might have been up to while you were away, and she might not have spent her whole time weaving on that loom. You kill all the witnesses, and then you say to your son, who hardly knows you because you've been away all that time, hey, this is really boring. Let's get going again. And off they go. So home is only the temporary thing in the basic European myth and mind. And that comes from the Greeks, okay? So you know that. For me, it is always going to be, where is your home? How have you established it? And for me, home was, of course, my little tiny family, my mother, my father, my brother, and me, and our making our way in a completely strange society, except that it was part of the British Empire. And being part of the British Empire meant there were red post office boxes, and there was Tate & Lyle syrup for sale, and Cow and Gate milk, and those things made my mother feel at home, because she had been a colonial in Hong Kong, she was a colonial in Canada, and that was, in a way, safe. How does home reverberate for me now? I don't know, really. I feel at home in many places. I feel at home in France because I went there young. I learned the language. I became part of the culture there. I feel at home in Canada, in Toronto, in my 100-odd-year-old house and on Georgian Bay, because that is the essence of our Canadian landscape. But do I feel completely settled? And I have come to the conclusion, as Margaret said yesterday, we're old, that I'll never feel at home anywhere. But I will feel that I have a place, and that I have there's a safe place, and I feel completely safe. So that's where I am coming from. And I know, looking at Vada, that you are part of the largest refugee group in the world. You are a Palestinian. There are 4.7 million Palestinian refugees. Where is home for you? What does home mean to you?
Thank you very much. I do believe, thinking about myself personally, of course, Palestine was I was born and it's still my home. But the point is, I find that the word home, for me, is not an accomplished project. It is a process in making. So wherever I have been, and I have been to many countries, I lived in South Africa for a long time, in Sudan, in Jordan, right now in Doha, in Qatar, in Istanbul, in Turkey. Wherever I go, I find an element of what I can call home, and that is added to this grand overarching theme of what home is. So in my opinion, the home is the place where you are getting the best out of it. Justice for me is important. Wherever there is more justice, where there's more dignity for me to feel, wherever there is like-minded people who struggle for values, that maybe define for me this closeness to what I call home, leaving it from geography, or moving away from geography into much more virtual and much more value-centered style of what I can call home.
What about you, Kiku? You're writing a book right now called The World Next Door. So are we next door to where we should be? Do we have to be at home to be next door to something?
Yes, I think that there is a sense of an interplay between being home, having a place in the world, and having a sense of who is next door, a curiosity of the people who are near us. But when you mentioned the Odyssey, I wanted to tell the story of my own sense of home, which is a sense of more than a place, a journey. Odysseus took a journey, and my own family took a journey. My name itself is a journey. My first name is Kiku, Japanese. I was born in Japan. My last name, Adato, is Spanish and Italian. And that points to a story I'll tell in a minute. And all my life, I moved, beginning in Japan, then New Jersey, and San Francisco, and Austria, speaking different languages, always moving different places because my father was a historian in the army. And my father's from Istanbul, Turkey. He was an immigrant to the United States. So the story, the deeper story of home, for me, is about memory. Again, a journey, because as Sephardic Jews, and this is very common, our family kept their key to their home in Seville, Spain, for hundreds and hundreds of years. So when they were expelled in 1492, during the Inquisition, they traveled, our family did, through the lower Mediterranean and ended up in Constantinople, Istanbul today, where they lived for over 400 years. But in their home, they always spoke Ladino, which is 15th century Castilian Spanish, just frozen in time, pure Spanish. That was the language of home, always, whatever country. So in Turkey, in Istanbul, my family spoke 7 languages, but only one language was the home language, the language my father learned in his home and spoke when the family came to the United States. So he lived in a little cocoon, and before he went to school, all he spoke was this 15th century Spanish. So this idea of the key, of the return, of a sense of home where you are not, but it is in your memory and it is constitutive. It makes up your identity. So 500 years later, in 1992, my father took the whole family onto his smallest infant grandchild back to Spain. And my husband, Michael Sandel, is asking me, what is this return about? You were thrown out during the Inquisition. You were given the decision to either convert, leave, or die. People were burned at the stake. What is this meaning of return? Isn't this some crazy form of nostalgia? And I answered that no, because the sense of home, a place, the key to a house we never lived in, never saw, was essential to our story. And what I draw from that for all of us, whether we have a very strong geographic sense of home and homeland, as the people do of the First Nations in Canada, where this is your home, and it's connected to a sense of place and nature and gratitude and welcoming, or whether you're always on a journey. It's the sense that we have to consider home like an archaeological dig with multiple layers. And we can't look at somebody's house, where they're living now, and make any conclusions about the deepest meaning of home to them.
A house is not a home. A house is a shelter. A home is a feeling. It's something that encases you, whether or not you have a physical house. And you've talked about language, and I think the idea, Sunny, that we had in Canada, in my generation, Margaret Atwood's and mine, we were very close to the Dutch because we had liberated them during the Second World War. And we had stories, I was a little child then, but we had stories of how we must welcome the Dutch to Canada. They were among our first big wave of immigrants post-war because they had starved and ate tulip bulbs, these lovely flowers, and they had been so hungry that when the Canadians came to liberate them, they ate tulip bulbs, but that they were a wonderful people, very clean, and they washed the sidewalks in front of their house. They were so clean, and they washed the windows every day. And so we had this image of the cozy, the home, everything. Is it really like that?
Exactly. Still eating tulip bulbs. No, I don't recognize your idea. I'm sorry. Don't clean my windows very often, I have to admit. No, so of course there is an idea of the Netherlands, but there is the reality of the Netherlands. I must say, because I was listening to your stories and it brought up all sort of associations of home, and I realized I've never felt home in the Netherlands, actually. And
why not? Why? You're blonde. You're not blue-eyed, but you're very blonde and you're very pink and white. You're perfect, perfect Dutch person.
No, but most Dutch people are very tall. So, no, I grew up, my mother is English, I grew up in a very alternative environment. We lived on a boat, we had our own electricity, we had our own vegetables. We were considered like gypsies by the rest of the village, so the people saw us as outsiders. And my mom always said whenever we went to the village, like that's where we have to eat with fork and knife, but at home we, you know, walk around naked and sing songs. So I've always felt kind of very different in the kind of bourgeois society because we were so different. So I was realizing that home for me is that boat. Whenever I dream, I still dream of that boat. And that, so in a sense, and a boat can move everywhere where you go. I used to imagine as a child that there would be Holland would be flooded, and then all the people who had made fun of me, I could like rescue them on that boat. So, but the Netherlands at the moment, the reality of the Netherlands is not this blonde, clean image that you have of people cleaning their pavement. The reality in the big cities is that 50% of the population...
50, you mean 50%?
Yes, something like around that figure, is has a bicultural background. So is not blonde probably, or not white at least. And the reality is also that a lot of people that are like white Dutch people cannot accept this reality. So the place that they call home, they feel it's being threatened, and this is being this fear is being pushed by politicians. So I think that there is at the moment the Netherlands there's very much in transformation.
Hadeel, where's home for you? When one looks at you, one can say, ah, where are you from? And then you open your mouth and you speak and you think, ah, where is she from?
Yes, exactly. So to answer that question in a very literal sense, I am a Londoner. I carry a British passport. I'm absolutely European. I'm African. All of these identities I hold at once. I think most people on meeting me assume I'm Indian or of South Asian origin. And fascinatingly, when I say I'm African, they assume I'm Indian East African, which I'm not. I'm Black African from a tribe called the Nubian people.
Nubians.
I'm Nubian.
That was the area that was flooded for the Aswan Dam.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So perhaps something I have in common with my Palestinian brother Wada is this notion of a homeland that's inaccessible. And in the case of the Nubians, our homeland was flooded, it's submerged, it's under the water, so there is no possibility of return. And on a side note, maybe that's something that will become more and more common when you look at Pacific Island nations like Kiribati. They're facing the imminent submersion. And if you look at what the president of Kiribati has done, migration with dignity. They've bought land in Fiji. The young people will be retrained and migrated, and the old people will be allowed to die with the ancestors. So that notion of a submerged homeland is something that will become more common. But really what I wanted to say about home relates to this idea of what is a home when you have no connection to a physical place, right? So echoing what Kiku said, it's really moving to come here and encounter an indigenous narrative and be in a country where people acknowledge the stewardship of the land and all the public events we've been to. Hearing that acknowledgement is incredibly moving, but speaks to a different type of identity to my own constructed sense of home. And I think, you know, if you'd permit me, indulge me, I wanted to quote a great Viennese essayist, Alfred Polgar, who said, and forgive me if I get it slightly wrong, that it's the destiny of the immigrant is not that the foreign land becomes home, it's that the homeland becomes foreign. And I find that incredibly moving, because I think in a lot of the conversations this week, even in the extraordinary lecture on Monday, the idea of states as fixed things and people as moving is slightly undermined by the experience of my parents and my generation, where actually countries are changing more than people are. The values of my family have remained pretty constant, but the countries in which we live, their values seem to be fluctuating quite rapidly. And if I could give one example, recently I was struck by a documentary on BBC World about British Jews whose families had fled Germany in the 30s in search of a new home. And post-Brexit, they were going back to Germany to get German passports. And they were having to reconcile whether their grandparents would be ashamed of that or not, and what that meant to them. And to me, it just seemed that Germany in 2017 maybe represents what Britain represented in 1937. That is, home is where you're allowed to express your values. Home is where you're allowed to be yourself. And the geography of that may change very rapidly. And so how we how we conceive of home in a way, maybe, to me, maybe mine's closer to where that home is where I'm allowed to be myself, and I have to be flexible and mobile about that. That's the reality in today's world.
Yanis, you are very Greek. I mean, I look at you, I know you're Greek. Excellent. And you, so therefore you are rooted in something, but we met and we, last year, and I wanted you to take part today because I feel that you are very, very rooted in your country, and yet you go everywhere and look at people who have no countries, who have no places to be. And how does that affect you as somebody who has had the privilege of being rooted, and you're going to go home, and that will be to Greece, and that is your home, and that's always been your home.
Right. Good morning, everybody. So first of all, I want to make a statement. I think if everybody looks back in their roots for maybe 100 years, you'll find out that we all have some refugee or migrant blood. I certainly have a lot of refugee blood from my grandmother. My mom's mother was from Izmir, an ethnic Greek who had to flee in 1922. And I grew up listening to her stories. The other thing I want to say is that my boss calls me a nomad. Also, I want to say that in Greece, in ancient Greece, Greek was not somebody who was born in Greece. So it was somebody who spoke Greek and he was educated the Greek way and believed in the Greek gods. We had a lot of gods. Now, for me, as I said, you know, all my life I travel. And I remember my mother was telling me stories. My father was in the army, so he moved from place to place. And I changed within 12 years, 9 schools. And, but what you said earlier about Odysseus, I was always kind of related to, this was my hero. And the quest, and the voyage, and his Ithaca. His Ithaca, the island of Ithaca, was his home. But it was about the voyage in life, and what you get, and you know, how you educate yourself and through all this, through this quest. So I tell you what, if you ask me what is home for me, home is a place where my heart beats slow, when I feel comfortable, when I feel safe, when I feel that people love me and nobody's going to backstab me, because usually I'm in terrible places. Covering, and yesterday I was telling that, my mission is to be out there and become the voices of those in need and in wars and all this, and also become your eyes and out there. So, yeah, I would say home is where my daughter is, and but I don't feel comfortable staying at home for too long, because I feel I have to go out there and meet people, and that was always my thing, to go around. So sometimes I would say, well, I live in Earth. That's my thing. Earth is my home, and I think everybody's home is Earth.
I think that we've had a nice round here, and there are many things that can be picked up. We want to hear from you in the audience. So put up your hands. We have our wonderful microphone box here, our little 6-degree box, and we also have other microphones. So hands up. Yes, Aziz.
Yes, Aziz is my name. For me, home is where my wife is with me and I get breakfast. This morning there was no breakfast, so no home. Someone who has lived in 9 countries and 11 cities, have traveled over 100 countries, was a chairman of the Refugee Board and have dealt with the Afghanistan crisis, had about 100,000 refugees in the camps, And for me, their home was when they wake up in the morning and they were safe that day, away from bombs, away from crisis. So for me, to see them happy, that was home. So now that changed my life. And for me, home is where I can go and help someone. For me, help is somebody I could send them to school. That is home. So really, home is for people of us who have traveled around the world. Problem after problem was born where parents had no money to send us to school, where they had no money to pay for the hospitals. So we see the value of that home very different. So I think Canada is a country. Madam Clarkson, you are last night to watch that movie was just outstanding. Those who are there will appreciate what a great movie is. So I think to me, if I had a chance last night to speak about refugees, I think we have the best model in the world in Canada, and that is Madam Clarkson herself, who came as a refugee and can be the Governor General of Canada. So I say to those refugees who are coming as a baby who wants to get out of those camps, yes, you can be the Prime Minister of this country. Come to Canada. They will give you a space to move and make this home. So really, home is, everyone's definition is different. It is remarkable with the talent people sitting here telling us about the home. For me, to help those Afghan refugees for 4 years full time, Madam Clarkson, I was at the Vancouver airport the other day, and as I'm going through the security, the lady at the security kept looking at me, and finally when I made an eye contact with her, she asked me if I know her. And she definitely looked somebody from Afghanistan. So I said, I'm really sorry, I don't know you. She said, I was a little girl in a refugee camp where you used to come and tell us to learn English language so Canada can help you. So while I learned English language, I came to Canada, and today I'm the head of the security at the Vancouver International Airport. That was a refugee from Afghanistan. So thank you. For me, home is somewhere where you can go and help somebody else. Really, that is home. Thank you.
Thank you. Vada, I know Vada has a comment on that.
Yes, thank you very much. And of course, I salute you for this magnificent spirit. You brought up Afghanistan. It brought back to my memory as well great emotions and thoughts. You know, I have seen a lot in this world. I have seen a lot of blood and wars. I have covered almost every conflict during the last 20 years in Africa, in Asia, wherever it happened, and in the Middle East, of course. I was brought up in a family as well, where my father couldn't see his sister for 20 years. I have not seen my brother, who is second to me in the family, I'm the eldest, for 25 years, for now, as a Palestinian who was not able to go back, and he was not allowed to leave. But the issue is, and I've seen in Sierra Leone, in Congo, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, things that the humanity really should be ashamed of because of all of the above mentioned. So I discovered with time that the moment when you as a human being uncover in yourself the possibility to feel that you are crying with the people in Sierra Leone or the child of Sierra Leone enslaved by a gang, or you are actually feeling emotional about a person displaced from Afghanistan, or you are standing for justice in Iraq or in Palestine or wherever it happens in the world, that is the moment when you have elevated yourself from this generational trauma that you speak about, or from this kind of being part of this simplistic definition of what we are. You have become then a human being. A human being embedded with values. And these values are not algorithms, are not materialistic, are not opportunistic, are not pragmatistic. They are values of what we are. And this is then what I call a real home. This is my home, is my spirit, my belonging, my values, and the liberation of us, liberation and the breaking of the chains of belonging to materialism and belonging to this solid entities which we call sometimes interest.
I just want to pick up something before we go to the next question again that you said, which was that your homeland becomes foreign. And that, I think, you crystallized something for me that I've been thinking about for some time. Because when I was growing up and later, and even now, people will often say, what do you think about China? Or how do you feel, do you like China, or don't you miss it? Or why don't you speak Chinese? Or any combination of those things. And what I would say is that I don't feel that. Like you, you feel British. Your culture is British. I feel Canadian. That is my culture. I know what my background is. I know where I've come from. But I don't identify with it. I think it's an interesting part of myself. And I think I do not deny it in any way, but it's not the thing that makes me feel comfortable. I can't say I feel good because I am a Chinese person. I feel it's interesting that I am a Chinese person, but I don't think that it is my defining characteristic. And that's what you were saying. But the homeland becoming foreign is, again, one step a little bit further than that.
Yeah, and I think we have to think about the weight we put on people when we classify them according to what they've lost or what it isn't anymore. So in many cases, if you talk to my parents or certainly my father is a Sudanese, the Sudan of his memory is not the Sudan of today. And so somehow, and I mean, I would wonder if some of the Syrians sitting here feel the same way, that the Syria they grew up with is not this Syria. So I think that's an extraordinary act of we call people by what they've lost, and I think there's something deeply sad about that.
Yeah.
But I would add to what that said, again, the great Roman African poet Terence said, I am human, so nothing human can be foreign to me.
Terence, Roman.
Yes,
actually,
from
yeah.
North Africa.
From North Africa.
From North Africa.
Yes,
African
and a former
Roman
slave.
poet.
And a
Exactly.
former slave.
But this idea that because you're human, nothing human can be foreign, I think is really powerful. And to a point we discussed very quickly earlier, people like Wada, myself, many of us in this world have one foot in the West, one foot in the East, or one foot in the North, one foot in the South. That's an extraordinary thing that we wrestle with on a daily basis. And I think our countries, our systems don't utilize that. I think the world would be very different if more of the World Trade Organization, more of the UN were composed of people who have kind of surmounted the cognitive dissonance of assuming that to be African and European is to be in conflict. It's not. I'm that every day. I can see a way forward that's constructive. So I think this notion of kind of duality can, in the modern world, be incredibly, incredibly valuable if people value that or choose to value that.
We had a question over here.
Hi.
Hi, Danny.
Hi. So yesterday somebody asked me if I feel at home here in Canada. And
Danny is a Syrian refugee.
Danny is a Syrian
and
refugee.
And now Canadian.
So yesterday somebody asked me if I feel home here in Canada, and I said sometimes because, and while I'm going to sound stereotypically gay, while I have a lot of friends in my living room and we're watching RuPaul's Drag Race, I feel at home because we're giggling and having fun. And sometimes when I came back from Europe and the visa officer stopped me while let everybody else in and asked me 26 questions, I counted them, before they let me in back to Canada despite having a permanent residency, I don't feel at home. And I feel at home when I think about Syria. You were talking a minute ago about how when you think about, I think about my memories there and I think about my upbringing there. So I feel at home there, but it's a home in my memory. It doesn't belong in real life anymore. It's not somewhere on the map that I can point out. I feel at home when I think about Egypt because I grew up in, I lived for 7 years in my teens in Egypt. And I feel at home when I go there and when I go there in my memory and I think about Cairo and my friends there. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm not monogamous when it comes to home. I can have multiple homes at the same time and I'm totally fine with that. That's how, as someone who came here to Canada in my early 30s, who grew up in Syria, who grew up in Egypt, who grew up in places that don't exist anymore, that's how I'm trying to come to terms with my seeking of home.
And hello, my name is Andreas. I'm actually on the board of the ICC, and once upon a time, I was a gay SKP from my birth country, from Greece, Yannis. to this beautiful land. And the only thing I want to offer here is that my ideal definition of a home is a place that doesn't define you, but instead allows you to define it. And that is the beauty of the homeland we've created here in this country.
I just, good catch, Marty, good catch.
I have a question here, a question there, and a question there.
Hi, my name is Emma. What a beautiful conversation about the meaning of home and identity. It's caused me to reflect in the last few days a lot about the people, so many people in the world who have such a hard time coming to grips with what is their identity. So I just want to speak a little bit about the 140 million orphans in the world for whom, it's very difficult to know their identity. And here in Canada, we have about 75,000 children in foster care, and about a third of those are from Indigenous communities. And I was actually started life as a ward of the state, and so I've kind of had my own journey with this question of identity to the point at which it's like, I'm kind of jealous to look around the room and hear everybody say, I'm this and I'm that and I'm from here and I can hold all of these things. And, there's many people in this country who will never really get to say with certainty, especially under Canada's closed adoption laws of the 80s and 90s, really quite where we come from. But absolutely consider Canada home, and I'm very proud to hold many of those heritages. But just wanted to put in a word for those who may never be able to say, I'm this or I'm that.
Just before you get up with your question, I want to put out one that maybe somebody can answer. Is there anybody here who is an American who feels that somehow they are not at home anymore? Just leaving that with you in case there is anybody. We would love to hear from you. We haven't heard from many Americans during these last 2 days. So the next question.
So my question is about the conversation around how you come to claim a place as home. My question to you is, there is a difference between saying that I am home and the home that you are claiming to be home, permitting you to say that. I'm permitting you and reinforcing you and supporting you in saying that. Can you speak a bit about that dissonance that creates in the person who is claiming a place as home, and how that journey is navigated from the microaggressions and the questions of justifying how you come to claim this place or all of these places as home?
Sunny has a...
Well, yes, interestingly, we were just discussing at the breakfast, you were saying that one of the only places if I may quote you, that one of the only places you don't feel home is Europe. And that comes back also to this research I've done on what it means to be white. And I think as Western countries, the dominant culture is this white culture that has in itself an idea of superiority. Yeah, superiority. So I think what we need to do is to educate white people to change that idea, because what we are seeing now that we have a whole group of people that are second-class citizens in their own country. You see it in all, like they get lower advices on what education to follow. There's discrimination in the labor market. So these are prohibiting people from really building their home in the country that is supposed to be their home.
Yes.
Two responses here.
Okay, Rob? Okay.
Question.
Mike, yes, oh yes, you would have a question.
My question for the panel is, and this came up briefly in one of the panels yesterday, it used to be that asking someone, where are you from, was an expression of curiosity and interest, whereas today many people feel that that question is a gesture of exclusion that should be avoided. And I'd like to know what the participants in the panel think about that. Should we not ask people, where are you from?
I don't think, I mean, if I can go first, because I've been around the longest probably as a foreigner, originally a foreigner in a country. I've been here for 70 years since I was 3. No, 75 years since I was 3. And so people always did ask, where are you from? And it's tinged. You know, there is a curiosity. It isn't malign necessarily. Sometimes it's kind of, you know, they just don't know. And it really, during the war, people didn't ask us because they knew we couldn't be Japanese since they were the enemy. They weren't really quite sure, and there weren't that many Chinese in the little city that I grew up in. And so you couldn't be placed. Nowadays, I don't know. I ask people, where are you from originally? Because I'm interested, because we are a country where almost everybody's from somewhere else originally. And whether or not that's tinged with animosity or simply curiosity or whatever, I don't think we should be making a big deal of it. I think it's really upsetting for people to say, I don't want people to say, where are you from? Well, sometimes they're just interested or they're ignorant or whatever. Why can't you handle their ignorance?
But it does display. A friend of mine who's black said to me, what it really means when people say that, why are you black?
Why are you black? Yeah, well, that may be, and I think that feeling is simply the
because he says I'm English, and they say no, but where are you really from? I mean, my husband is non-white, and he gets it all the time, and he makes a point of saying Groningen. That's a city in the north of Holland, and you know.
Yes, and that stops the conversation if you want to.
And then they say, but you're so exotic, and it displays not being used to this reality that is actually.
But I think we have to be very careful between bad manners, ignorance, and a kind of, why are you here kind of thing. You know, I think really there's a gamut of all of those things. And I think we as people who come to a country where we are not understood or we have to have an element of forgiveness in our approach to the people who are ignorant. That was my father's approach always. All right, my father always said, if they don't know where you're from, then explain it to them.
How is it for you when people ask you?
Yeah, I was just about to say, I think it's fascinating because you have to learn to read the intentionality. So my experience, if it's somebody of South Asian origin asking me, it's because they assume I am and they want to include me.
Yeah.
And I feel really sad saying, oh, I'm not Indian, I'm sorry, I'm not. And they'll say to me, but where are your grandparents from? And I'll say, no, also the same place. But your great-grandparents, I'd say, also, I'm sorry, the same place. I can't, I'm sorry. But it's inclusion, and I would say that's also the same. I have a Arabic name, Hadil. So whether you are Arab or whether you're a Muslim from the Far East, there's this, oh, you're a Muslim, and it's actually about inclusion. In Western culture, and when I'm asked candidly in white majority countries, it's about exclusion. Mm-hmm. It's generally, because I say London. But where are you really from? I mean, really, London. Where are you from? Are you asking where my parents are from? My parents grew up in Egypt. And then you just get willfully misdirecting them, right? My parents grew up in Egypt, but we're actually Sudanese. But then my father lives in France. Because you're peeling back the layers of them, not
the thing is, somehow. Like what a friend of mine said, it's like you don't always feel to share your whole painful, maybe painful family history. That's...
Yeah.
So I just want to answer your question. I feel the same. I feel that nowadays, I wanted to ask Aziz, because he said he's from Afghanistan, and I've been in Afghanistan many times, and I wanted to ask him, you know, are you like Pashtun or Tajik or something, and start a conversation out of interest. And then I thought maybe he doesn't feel good about it, which makes me feel suppressed. You know, why can't I ask? I mean, you know, for me, it's a simple question. You know, I look at you and
But you're not asking the question out of exclusion, and I think, but that is, as a white person, maybe sometimes like, you have to prove your intention are good when you're asking it.
I don't want to prove anything. Look, it's a very simple thing. I think I have asked you when we met.
But why don't you want to prove your intentions are good? That's just being considerate.
Yeah.
Well, I like to keep things simple.
But things are not simple.
But
Things-
well, maybe for you it's not simple. For me, it's simple. When
Because you're
when somebody
a male.
asks me where are you from, I don't feel that somebody's trying to.
But you're white.
I'm sorry.
You don't have to be sorry,
do I
but
have
it's
to
a-
feel
it's-
bad? I'm
No,
white.
no,
I
but
mean-
this is what always happens with white people when you point to their whiteness. They start being defensive and saying, "Excuse me." You don't have to apologize. No.
I mean, I think what's interesting is I'm happy to answer the question of where I'm from. I think it's when people don't take my answer and try to turn it into their version of my answer. And I don't actually mind when someone says, "Oh, but you know, I'm curious, your family heritage." You know, if there's some ethnographic curiosity or geographical curiosity, that's fine. But you can tend to, and I'm seeing people nod around the room. I feel like people in my situation, you can generally tell the intention.
Yeah,
and
this is
and
what I'm
respond
saying. You know, that's why I'm saying keep
And
things
respond.
simple. So when I ask you, I want to know because, you know, I'm curious or out of interest. Maybe I want to ask you because I've never been to Sudan, so I want to know. I'm very curious. I'm a journalist.
Sure, and I think we're embracing that possibility, but I agree with Sunny. If I say to somebody, I'm from London, and they say, no, where are you really from? That's
Okay,
a lie.
that's no, I
malign
understand. I
and
understand.
welcome.
I understand this part, but as I said, I want to keep things simple. You know, like I want to ask you, where are you from? And then I'll think, yeah, I've been there. You know this thing, and because you know I'm genuinely.
But they never ask
as
white
a-
people where you're
as
from.
a-
They don't. They say you're from the Netherlands, but Americans, white Americans, they never say, no, but where you're really from? Like, is it Scottish? Is it Irish? Is it, do they? Yeah?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Here's a white American.
Do they ask you that all the time?
Rob?
With that framing,
But-
I don't feel at home.
Well, what?
Just
Vada.
to come out of this particular one, I just give you a story of my own experience. A Palestinian, Arab, Muslim,
Yeah.
and most of the time when I'm stopped at the borders, they look at that passport, they find Afghani visa, Pakistani visa, and North Korea.
Oh.
You know? And you should have seen the shock on the immigration officers in New York who held me for hours of interrogation. What are you doing in North Korea and Afghanistan, Pakistan, Palestinian, Arab, Muslim? It's complicated. So when it goes into that direction, it becomes ask officers, immigration officers, that question will be important to be asked. In every country, the first impression you form when you land in that country, including Canada, by the way, who I also felt the same when I landed in Canada. But the people might be much more welcoming, much more diverse, much more flexible, but definitely, unfortunately, right now, this issue of nationalism and citizenship is summarized in a security perspective rather than a cultural and you know, open-minded approach.
Kiku, what do you think of this? You've been listening intensely. I want to hear it.
I think that one of the earlier ideals of home we mentioned was to be welcoming, to be hospitable. But in our public discourse, oftentimes we're not. We live in a very fractious time in which insults are hurled, nationalists, right-wing movements, challenging people, criticizing people, the most unwelcoming from our own president, you know, in the United States, to immigrants. And so on the question of where are you from, to understand the many meanings of that question, and I like the idea of being hospitable and open, the person's receiving the question, to what the intentions of the person are. And I think that that's the key. I wanted to turn the discussion back to the idea, we started with Odysseus and the idea of home not being a place, but a journey. And from the Greek word in the Odyssey, it was described, the return home was described as a nostos. Nostos means, it's a complicated word, but it means in the Odyssey, the return of the heroes from Troy, the sea journey home. But it also referred to the storytelling, to the poetry of that journey. And I think that that is so important in our understanding of home and storytelling, even if we're orphaned, even if we don't know our origins, as a form of agency in the world, as a form of action and speech, storytelling is very important. We begin to weave a story. And that story of leaving home and coming home is also embodied in a word we're more familiar with, nostalgia, which has this Greek word in it, nostos, return home, and aglia, which means, aglos rather, which means pain. The pain of losing home, of homelessness. And that can be the tangible pain of the refugee, of the immigrant, of somebody who is a victim of natural disaster, person who's orphaned. But it's also part of the human condition. And what's interesting, I wanted to read the origin of this word, nostalgia, because it was considered originally as a medical condition, first documented in 1668 in a dissertation by a Swiss medical student, Johannes Hofer, and then officially recognized as a disease. And I'll read you from the 1833 Cyclopedia of Practical Medicine. The concourse of depressing symptoms which sometimes arise in persons who are absent from their native country when seized with a longing desire of returning to their home and friends and the scenes of their youth. And this was considered a medical condition, particular to sailors and soldiers, to enslaved peoples, to convicts, and during the Civil War, it was documented by northern physicians, this intense disease. But what I want to rescue from our idea, the core meaning of nostalgia, is this Greek meaning, the ancient Greek meaning of the return and of the journey and the recognition in all of our lives of the pain and the suffering that just living a life, going back to as a human being at home in the world, that our basic humanness is to understand that in a way there's a play between being a stranger and being a neighbor. And the most profound way that we can be hospitable to others is to recognize in us that we are strangers ourselves, that we've experienced strangeness, and that that's part of our ancient history. We were strangers in a strange land. And the story, which is core to Islam and Judaism and Christianity in the Bible, of being a stranger in a strange land, of Abraham welcoming the strangers, washing their feet, these 3 strangers who came to his tent in the desert, and offering them a meal and offering them comfort. So I think if we think more deeply of the ways that we are strangers, we are also going to understand other people's forms of estrangement in their own condition, in their own experiences, and have a more hospitable public discourse rather than one of insults and ignorance and the rejection of the immigrant.
Rob has the mic. Rob has the mic here. We just go down.
I want to add something to that.
Yeah, after.
Okay, I was asked, or I heard the question about feeling comfortable as an American. So I had this fantasy that he actually threw me this box like a football receiver and I could go down on my knee. So, where I'm, Kikui, the storytelling reminds me of our lunch yesterday. I have been grappling with the notion of home, and it resonates with all of what I hear from you. About 2003, I was a recovering financial speculator, and I sailed to Antarctica with 9 people for 57 days. And there was an event where a wandering albatross came up and took off my glove and sat down with me. A bird with about a 14-foot wingspan. I started petting it, I started crying, and I said, I can go home now. 2 days later, as we were sailing across the Arctic Ocean, I was terrified. I said, I can go home, but I don't know where home is for me. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. That's a geography. About a year ago, I was planning a conference on the turmoil of race and inequality in Detroit, Michigan. And a gentleman who's a photographer took me on a bike ride around the city of Detroit to shoot the graffiti of the city to use as backdrop. And he started telling me, because he gave me a bicycle that was created by a company called Shinola in honor of Muhammad Ali. And he said, you know why that bike? And I said, no. He said, because Muhammad Ali was a 12-year-old boy, and he had a bicycle, and it got stolen. And he got furious, and a lady took him to meet a policeman to write a report, and he said, young man, if you're going to be that angry and you're going to deal with people, you got to learn how to fight. So Muhammad Ali, by getting his bicycle stolen, was displaced into becoming a tremendous boxer and a great spirit. So he said to me, in your life, what happened here in Detroit that nudged you? And I have no idea where this came from, but I stopped the bike and I looked at him and I said, what happened to me is I lost my innocence as a child. The 1967 riots still haunt me as I watch my father with a t-shirt tied to his radio antenna going downtown to serve in the hospitals while we're hearing gunfire in the background. And tanks and sandbags are all over our street. Walter Reuther's death in an airplane, the race riots, the Vietnam War issues. And I felt, as I watched Detroit's deindustrialization, the damage that was done there, like I watched a world, a media world, like an ABC News type world, not trying to explain what was happening, but trying to alleviate the anxiety of the American people that their dream was fragile. They created a cause which was called Corrupt Black Public Administration and Entrepreneurs Who Lost Their Mojo. And I looked at that, and I could start to understand why I was inspired to run the Institute for New Economic Thinking. I felt alone, but I stopped feeling that geography was my place. Geography had influenced my purpose, but my home was my purpose. And this year, Kiko, I was preparing, she knows my little daughter, Dylan. I was preparing a slide from the Odyssey of the Siren Songs of Temptation to talk about fake news in Copenhagen. And my daughter walked in and she said, Daddy, what are you doing? And I said, I'm trying to figure out where my home is. And she said, well, you need to listen to You Know Who You Are. And I said, what's that? She said, from Moana, the Disney movie, Dad. And she puts it on. We have one of those Alexas. Alexa, play You Know Who You Are. She screams at it, and it starts to play, and then she looks at me and says, get the words on your phone. So I sat there in front of this group with that slide from the Odyssey about my returning home. And they did a little typewriter graphic of this song. The lyrics are very quick. I came across the horizon to find you. I know your name. They stole the heart from inside you, but it does not define you. It is not who you are. You know who you are. So, as I looked at them, I said, the reason I'm here is to dissuade you from fixating on fake news. I don't believe in fake news because I grew up in a fake reality. And I'm home with you now, fighting these fake realities to get closer to our humanity wherever I am in geography. So.
Adrian, thank you so much. What I would like to do, if I may, we have less than 30 minutes left for this wonderful discussion. I would love to be able to go around to get as many voices as we can. I'm going to urge you to restrict your comments to less than a minute if we can, so that we can do a quick go around and get more voices. I saw lots of people who wanted to say things. I'm going to start with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. That's a very tough act to follow. I think going back to some of the earlier discussion about the question about where are you from, I have a similar story, I'm sure, to people on the stage as well as many people in this room and beyond these walls of I was born in England, I'm Canadian, I'm Indian, and I've lived in 7 countries across 4 continents. So home to me is a very, very nebulous and ambiguous concept. So I'm curious more about when, given that there was so much discussion about values and the people being the definition of home, why, when the question comes, where are you from, A, do we not ask each other both, no matter what your color is and where we assume you're from, but B, why don't we also say, let me tell you who I am, and where I'm from is just a part of that. Thank you.
That is, I think that is the kind of thing that is really interesting. And Sunny said something to us in the pre-conversation that I want to hear about, because although you define yourself now as filmmaking activist, trying to make things better in the Netherlands, in your home country, for the 50% of the people in the large cities who do not feel they are not excluded. But you yourself are the product of something horrifying and traumatic, and you have lived through that. I want you to tell people that.
Well, I don't really know. Well, it does relate to the question of home. I'm currently writing a book about a family history. My father was a product of rape in the Second World War. So my, what I suppose is my grandfather was a Nazi who raped my grandmother, and she was. Anyway, I don't know why. Yeah.
Of course, it's emotional. It has to be. You see,
yeah, but I always thought I wasn't
really
emotional about it, but now suddenly, like, saying it in front of all these people. Anyway, so my grandmother was it's so American. Anyway, so my grandmother was working for this man who was a mayor in a Nazi town in Germany, and he raped my grandmother, and my father was born. And when my grandmother returned after the war, she couldn't raise my father because she remarried, and this new husband, they were very poor people. So I think she felt she needed to get married to survive. And she left my father behind because my father's stepfather, well, it wasn't his stepfather, but anyway, this man didn't want my father there because he was a bastard child. So my father was raised by his grandparents, and that, of course, has shaped him and has shaped me.
Mm-hmm.
So
what could be more outside, you know, in a society where the rules matter so much, where marriage matters, where family matters, all of those structures, you know,
he was the permanent outsider.
He was the permanent outsider.
Yes, and he was raised by his grandfather, who was a Marxist and an activist and a land worker. And I think I get my activist genes from that, my great-grandfather. Yeah, so...
So you're not afraid of being outside, you're not afraid of being excluded in that sense, because you grew up on a boat anyway.
Yes. But what I'm interested in is the idea of intergenerational trauma, that traumas, there is this body of researchers called epigenetics, whereby they say that traumas find a way to be part of your genes and get passed over to next generation. And of course, that's very relevant to all of us living in diaspora, or people that are descendants of slavery, and for all women anyway, because we all
women,
yeah, suffered multiple traumas generations back. Yeah.
We have over here.
Hi, my name is Peter Chung. I'm from Vancouver, BC. I was a refugee from Vietnam in 1979. I stand up because I just am compelled to express myself, because I generally don't come up here and speak in front of a group. But Adrian has a way to inspire me to do things I have never done before. I have a couple of shares. I keep hallucinating. In 1979, there was a forum like this, or somebody get together and discuss these kind of issues, and that's how I come from Vietnam and got accepted in this wonderful country. And all the blessing things that had happened to Vietnamese refugees, and have all these huge opportunity to be here and create the things that we create. The questions about home, my parents would never want me to talk about Vietnam. They never want to talk to me to anybody talk about Vietnam, or even mentioning going back, and that's kind of the story I grew up with. So, as many people know now, Vietnam is very different, and a lot of people going back. I also have a challenge of going back home, and this subject is just sending goosebumps in my hand about home, about the tragedies, about the memories. I mean, I don't know where the home is. And as I was contemplating all the questions around me, I came up with something I want to share is, I think home is the decisions. I mean, once we decide where your home is, then we have the responsibility to make the home the way we want it to be. I live in Vancouver, Burnaby, a house like that, and I'm a busy person. And for the longest time, that place that I live in is very transient, because my energy, my focus is outside to make a living, to build my company and all of that stuff. So, and only recently when I had a moment to pause and I go, well, I should make this a home. And I start seeing weeds in the gardens and all of that stuff that I haven't removed for so long. Likewise, the opportunity to be here and say, well, wow, Canada is a home. And 2 days ago, I witnessed the ceremony. And again, that emotion rushed to me and I go, wow, this is my home. I mean, 30 years ago, I get the opportunity to swear in, and I haven't done much for the country, really. I was so focused on my own business. And where's my home now? I mean, Canada's my home, Burnaby's my home, Vancouver's my home, and, and Vietnam was once my home. So all of these comes up for me, and I appreciate you listening to my share. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Zara Salman, and I'm a high school student. I was born and I live in Toronto, but I also get the question a lot, where are you really from, when I say Toronto. And when I answer, I'm from Pakistan, I feel like a fraud, just because I've only ever been there once when I was 2, and I don't even remember it. It was for my uncle's wedding, and he lives in America now, so. It's just, I also believe that home should be a decision, and I've been trying to decide where I want my home to be, and you come to realize that there aren't so many options, because I was always raised, my parents, I was privileged enough for them to say to me, well, you can always choose where you want to go. And I always wanted to go to Harvard. I wanted to study in Harvard. I wanted to graduate from Harvard. But recently, my parents say, no, you shouldn't go to America because your last name is Salman, we're Muslim, and Islamophobia is just so dominant right now, you wouldn't be safe. So I started looking more in other countries and other places all over the world, and there always seems to be a reason why I shouldn't go, why my race, my skin color, my religion, that sometimes I don't even feel I identify with anymore. It's something I was raised with and something my parents do. It's stopping me from leaving Canada. And eventually, it feels like I'm trapped, and you start to hate the fact that you have to stay in a country, and it stops feeling like your home. And it's just hard to realize that it's not Canada's fault and it's not your own fault. It's the fault of the values that we hold and the discrimination that everyone faces to an extent. And I just wanted to say that I believe that everyone belongs everywhere in the world and everyone should. And all of you have such lovely stories, and thank you for sharing.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Doyen. I'm the Inclusion and Innovation Builder at Shopify. One of the things I wanted to put forward is our national anthem. And so when you just reflect on the first line or the first two lines, so, O Canada, our home and native land. And in discussions over the past few weeks, someone said to me, what if we rewrote it as, O Canada, our home, the natives' land? And we have not begun to discuss, and I'm so sorry that that perspective is missing from that table, that platform, where the Indigenous perspective is. And I raise it because we shouldn't always need Indigenous people to raise the fact that their voices are missing. It is incumbent on us, those of us who are all settler people, unless you're Indigenous, you're a settler, whether you've been here for generations or new like me. And I think back to the question about where you're from. And is it simple? It absolutely is. But guess what? It discounts the importance of race and the role race plays in how we define what being Canadian is. In July, I was in the US for a wedding, my friend's wedding from McGill. And the stepfather of the groom came to me. He assumed I was someone else. And no, all black people don't look alike. But he assumed I was someone else. He asked me if I was born, and I said no. And he said, so where are you from? And I said, I'm from Canada. And he said, oh, I've never seen a colored Canadian before. Now, everyone might jump on that and think, oh my God, he just said the colored word, like how it's like saying somebody's a nigger and like really going back to Jim Crow time. But I think back to, I'll forgive him for the colored bit. What he's saying to me is, he's not exposed. He has an idea of what a Canadian is, and that a Canadian is absolutely white. And the idea of multiculturalism and how we've begun to define diversity in this country hasn't really sunk in, even here and more so abroad. But I want you to step back and begin to think about how we're defining this discussion of home when we have not heard an Indigenous perspective, and think about the fact that these people have been here since time immemorial. We've taken away their home, and so they're seeing a completely different landscape. So imagine what it's like to live in your home, but you can identify with nothing in it, particularly the most patriotic symbols like the flag and your anthem. So I just wanted to put that forward to you.
You're quite right to talk about the Indigenous peoples in the article I wrote for the Globe and Mail last week, leading up to this discussion, and I did not do it this morning because I went off on the Greek trend. I talk about the fact that we are based in a land which has belonged to the Native people, and the Native people who welcomed us and made it possible for us to exploit it. They gave us everything, and we treated them shabbily starting 100, 150 years ago, and that we are now doing that redress, and that we can't have an egalitarian society in Canada without realizing that a disproportionate amount of Native people are homeless. A disproportionate amount of Native people do not have access to the same kinds of things that the rest of us do, and that is really important. And I think it's been underlying here for the last 2 days. The fact that we have not mentioned it in this particular one, I am remiss in that.
Can I add something?
Sorry. Just one more.
Scully Squego, I just want to acknowledge you, Yawanko, for your comments. My name is Douglas, and it's in English. It's Andrea Christian. I spoke to the issue yesterday. I work with a tremendous agency called Toronto Council for our Native Culture Center, and who I'm standing beside is a young lady who's Soto. We have Anishinaabe Kwe, we have Afghanistan, and we have Haudenosaunee. And I think it's always really important. Again, thank you for that. That I was listening to the discussions on home home is really for us. Again, I speak to as being Haudenosaunee. And when we say in the language, and when you understand, when we stand, we say, "Skole sigwego yo dagwas ni gets." O kwali ne wagi da loda on da aga ne wago joda. You know, gneskanaya gnaskoda. And what I'm telling you is who I am. What I'm saying to you is introducing to you, not only to you, but to the universe and to Creator. To be very proud of who I am, my name, my clan, my family, my nation, and the title that I hold. And it's always really important because we advance that first, so it becomes really difficult. The house, the home are the same. The house is our body. And we live in a land, and when we say the longhouse, you imagine in your mind, I assume, that it's a building. The longhouse is from east to west and everything in between. It's how we take care of our body, how we take care of our home, and how we take care of the land. There's no difference, there's no separation. And as our identity in terms of Toronto Council Fire is really critical, that we encourage individuals who come into the city. We encourage them to identify very clearly who they are and to be very proud and to wear their nation, whether they're blonde or whether they're not. We want them to be really proud, and we instill in them that you need to speak to your language, to your identity, and to ensure that you can wear it really proudly. And so listening to the dialogue around the table, I become really sad. And so this morning I wasn't going to come because I have to have eye surgery, and I want to get my had to have an appointment. I said, no, this is really important, because as a young man across ways said he's never really afforded that opportunity to speak in different forums. And so for me, it was really critical, because my eyes, I can get them tested tomorrow. And that surgery is still going to take place. But I said, I wanted you to know who I am, whether or not I look or don't look, but I will wear who I am, and to understand the color is Haudenosaunee. You know, the symbols that I wear are who we are as a people and what's really important. This particular time is, what's really critical for us is that we have our ceremonies, and why we acknowledge the 13 moons, and why we acknowledge through our ceremonies is to remind one another, and those little ones, the little ones who learn the language, the little ones who each year and the year thereafter, when we have our Kalawio, which and it travels from the east to the west, for our ceremonies, is to ensure that our responsibility is to ensure that our next generations, and also to support these young people, to remind them who they are, and they have ceremonies, they have a language, and to never give that up. We ask, you know, in the language, we ask, you know, who you are. And so then it's really proud to give back to the universe, to give that description. And you're portable. I'm portable. I come from, somebody asked me where I'm from, I say Skyworld, because that's the beginning of my teachings. And then I was being able to land here on this Turtle Island because of ancestors. And then when it's time for me to give up this shell or my house, then I'll return with my spirit and I'll go back again to my homeland. But this is the same principle, which is my teachings, and I want to make sure that anybody and everybody that we come into contact, including your people, to be really proud of who you are. Please don't try to get into a melting pot like the United States of America. You know, that the fact is you need to maintain your language, wear your color proudly, and if you get a chance to learn your language, then share it, because we have so much commonalities as we do very little differences. So I just want to, again, acknowledge you for allowing us, and acknowledging these young people we give them every opportunity to make sure that they're heard, they're present. And yesterday's exercise, they clearly demonstrated that they wanted to have their own table, and their table was about land and water, because that's who we are. So, I think, go,
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Hello. So a little bit earlier, you guys asked if there's people who feel as though maybe Canada isn't their home, and you guys were asking if there were Americans in the audience. But even as an Indigenous person, I don't even feel that Canada is my home. Canada wasn't my home when my mom was sent to residential school. Canada wasn't my home when my grandmother and my aunt were sent to boarding residential school, and they were abused, and they were there till they were 16. Canada wasn't my home when my grandmother's brothers had to escape residential school and had to find their way back home without being caught. Canada wasn't my home when my schoolmate was part of the missing and murdered Indigenous women's. Canada wasn't my home in my first year of college when I had a racist roommate. Canada, I feel, has never really been my home, and I don't know that Canada will ever really be my home.
I just want to add a personal experience. My second wife was, her father was Afro-American and her mother was Danish. She decided to come to Greece when she was 18, and she fell in love with Greece, where a few years later we met, we got married and everything. And I remember she was very fanatic Greek. So in a lot of time, she was almost nationalist, in a good way. Yeah, I mean, not nationalist, you know the band. And I remember talking about this, and I said, what's wrong? I mean, you know, you can say that you are from there and there. I said, sure. When I have a conversation and people ask me, a lot of times I say, where are you from? From Greece. She always say, from Athens. And I said, you're not from Athens. Come on, you know, you look. I said, okay, so let me tell you my story. And she would say this, her story. But what I wanted to say, and you know, with this story, is that I think we, at the end of the day, we can choose who we are and how we feel. That's why in the beginning I said, in ancient Greece, people were considered Greeks only if they had spoke the language and had you know, all the education and all these things. So I think in our world today, well, in our at least Western democratic civilized world, whatever, we have the choice to decide who we are and where are we from. And then if we want to continue our conversation, you know, we can say, ah, yeah, and my father is from there. I mean, my grandmother, as I said in the beginning, is an ethnic Greek, I think, or she thinks, from Turkey. My father has he had red hair and blue eyes. It's not very Greek. and to finish with this, I have a very good friend who is an author he's Scottish. He has blonde, red hair, blue eyes, very kind of pinkish face and all this. And one day he went to have a DNA test. And he wrote me an email back and he said, guess what? I'm 20% Greek and I'm 10% Arab and I'm 15% Asian and 30% German and whatever. So, you know, that's why I said in the beginning, we are all, you know, members of the same community, and it's called Planet Earth. Thank you.
I didn't want to.
Well, I just wanted to respond that I think the idea of choosing your identity is done from a position of privilege. Yeah. A lot of people don't have that choice, I think, and because it's been like I'm always, well, anyway, I want to say it's been a really beautiful session, which is quite emotional. But just to get to make a political analysis, like in the Netherlands, there has been some research that show, like when you look at how news is being reported, that whenever someone with a bicultural background that is Dutch does something good, they're called Dutch. When they do something bad, they're called Surinamese Moroccan. So if there is like talk of a crime, they're being called Moroccans are blah, 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 blah. And when they're winning a sports award, they're called Dutch. So I think that is a way through which we exclude people that belong to the same country.
I have two comments over here, Adrian.
I'm just going to go around here.
Okay.
Sorry, I mean, I felt really struck to respond, and you have to permit me for not remembering the names of the two young women. Sorry, Zara and, sorry, at the back. I didn't catch your name? Christina. I was really struck by your sense of not feeling of Canada and feeling excluded more broadly by the rising Islamophobia. And I think one of the real challenges we face, I mean, I wanted to find something that might be hopeful or optimistic going forward, which is tough, right? But one of the things I would say is a lot of the rising xenophobia that we're seeing, right, and this conservatism, you know, I'd say there's two things. First of all, it's It's people that believe the best days in their countries are in the past, right? I'm a progressive, I'm not a conservative, because I think for people like me, the future has to look better than the past. There's no way that to be black or to be female, to be from any minority, to be gay, to be disabled, is to say, I want to live in some idealized past. It's not true. We need to live in a future that respects our rights. So I look to the future. The second thing I want to say about this kind of idealization of the past, it's one thing to remember Syria, right? It's one thing to remember Syria or Egypt, but the past that they're talking about when they talk about Brexit, for example, never existed. We have to stand up to these narratives about this amazing, make America great again. What they're talking about is in the mind. It never existed. Let's be very clear about Britain post-Brexit. Unless they reoccupy 1/3 of the world's land surface, they will not be great again. They will never be what they were unless they colonize people again. It's finished. That world has finished. So I don't know if it gives hope, but I do think that, the notion of international law, the notion of international rights, why we're fighting, what we're fighting for, and what we're fighting against is a fundamental belief that the future is better. And I think all of us have an obligation to stand up and fight against these narratives that, somewhere in the past was a country where we didn't all die of cholera at 10, or we weren't all, kind of discriminated against. Somewhere there was a place where there were jobs for everyone, there was work for everyone, and we all skipped through fields of milk and honey. It never existed. It never existed. That could exist in the future, but it did not exist in the past. And I think we really have to fight for all of us. What was it we said at the beginning, right? Like, home is where I get to be me. Home is where you get to feel like a citizen, and you get to feel like you can go wherever you want.
Okay, I will take this forward. Thank you very much. By suggesting the following. The story is one. If you listen to what we have been talking for the last 1.5 hours here in this hall, basically each one of us is giving his version of one story. The fact that there is no justice, the fact that there is the system, in a way or another, is interfering, politics is putting a lot of pressure and generating a lot of barriers and a lot of complications for us. Wherever you are, and this is what I have reached now. I'm living in a part of the world where it is the most complicated at this moment in time, to say the least. We are killing each other. We are eradicating each other. We have xenophobia. We have racism. We have sectarianism. We have religious complications, ethnicities, everything at this moment in the Middle East, where I have come from. But always I have the following statement I tell the youth in the Arab world, that the future, you should guard the future. If we cannot have a brilliant present, but at least save the future from being hijacked and save the future from being punished by the reality that we are living in. Build the future, at least imagine it. Imagine the future in a nice way. We are privileged right now, your generation more than mine, you are privileged that you have internet. Before, we were not even able to express our thoughts and ideas to the world. Wherever you are now, you can sit and become part of a universal struggle for justice, for freedom, for equality, fighting xenophobia, Islamophobia, racism, sectarianism, whatever you call it. So
Sexism.
do it. Don't stop only by complaining. I think we need to have that kind of international networking that we can save our future from being shaped by our present, because the present is not the most brilliant present that the humanity has established. Thank you very much.
I give Kiku's got the last word.
I wanted to go back to the eloquent statements made by the mother and Christina, that one is this idea of, Christina spoke to the pain and the suffering of being a stranger in your own home, a stranger in your own land. Having to explain and tell your story is an act of courage, and it involves enormous pain. And that is the connection between the story of the Odyssey and your story, in the sense that that there is in the return to home, or maintaining home and bringing it into the world over and over again, and its spiritual meaning, involves suffering and pain. And I think that that is a very different, we may all experience it in different ways, but to be a stranger in your own home, or to have people in your own home not understand you, have to tell the story, as I said, is a difficult and courageous act that I think we're all acknowledging. And as far as I see, I know Canada has a long way to go, but you're so much farther ahead than the United States. We are not even beginning to tell the story of our Indigenous people. So that's one thing. And then the idea of the return to home, again, is part of all of our journeys. And it takes different forms. I like very much what you said, that you have to think of the future and where you're going, but also the past, and especially its resonant spiritual meanings, are alive in the stories we tell. It's not, the past is never really past. And to acknowledge home in memory and stories, we bring it into the present. We give it birth into the world over and over again. And for somebody like me, who was taught all the way back to our most ancient past, not to mention Spain, which would be a more modern past, the idea of, again, these biblical stories, these foundational stories, is to say that we must be reflective, again, about home. More than a place, is a deeply human journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Before the panel leaves the stage, I would encourage you to please stand up. We'd like to take a group shot. And I just wanted to quickly go over what's happening next. We're running a little bit late, so there is a break. We'll try and keep it to 20 minutes if we can. Then following that, we have 4 different exchanges. On this stage again, there's a panel discussion moderated by Doug Saunders of the Globe and Mail on the power of words. Up in this room here, we have an exchange with Access Now, speaking about digital rights and how the human rights can be maintained through use of online mechanisms. In the Education Commons, which is up here, we have a forum on sanctuary cities and how we maintain them. And finally, in Seminar 2, we have an exchange on media and diversity in media. So thanks very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Aziz.
You're brilliant. Last night was just
thank you so much.
I was a chairman of the refugee board, and I was at that border.